Hi everyone. Today we're going to be focusing in on day 7, writing equations of the trig graphs. We are almost done. We have day 7 and day 8, and that's going to wrap up this unit. So hopefully you guys have kept up and done a nice job with all of the lessons so far. If you have any questions on any of the lessons, please make sure that you contact me because I am going to give a test on this unit. Okay, so when we go ahead and write equations of the trig function, you want to go ahead and you need to identify what curve is it. Is it sine or cosine? So within all the notes, we always say that sine starts at 0, which is the midline, okay? Now, when there's a shift, that midline does change a little bit, so just be careful with that, okay? So this right here, you guys will see it starts at 0, it ends at 0. We can see that this is the sine curve, okay? Cosine starts at the amplitude and ends at the amplitude. So you guys can see right here, it'll start at the amplitude and it will end at the amplitude. So that's the first thing that you need to decide. The next thing you need to do is you need to figure out what the amplitude is, okay? So it's the distance from the midline to the max or min point, okay? So here's my midline, y is equal to 0. So you guys can go over, you can see right here, my amplitude would be 1. And here, you guys can see here, the amplitude is also 1. This is extremely important, and a lot of kids, if I were to say if they missed a point, it would be based on whether or not it's positive or negative. And you guys have to remember that when you do a negative, it's a reflection. So you guys have to see, for example, if sine started at 0, it would go down, back up to 0, and back to 0 again, okay? So with sine starts at 0. If it goes up, it's positive. If it goes down, it is negative, okay? Cosine starts at 1 and ends at 1, but if it was a negative, it would start at -1, and it would be reflected or flipped, so it would go like this, and back up, down, to -1. It was reflected or flipped over that x-axis. So that's one thing you guys have to be careful with that negative. All right, you need to decide what your B is, your frequency. How many curves between 0 to 360, okay? This is one curve, the 5 major points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? So this right here is one curve or one cycle here, and this one right here, again, is one curve. So if you see something like cosine and you see 1, 2, that would have a frequency of 2. Figure out the vertical shift, the midline. It's halfway between the max and the min, and that'll help you with your shifts, and then you need to put it all together. So when you guys go ahead and put it all together, your equation will look like amplitude A sine bx, okay, that's my frequency, plus D. Plus D would be your vertical shift up or down, okay? Or y is equal to A, which is amplitude, cosine bx, which is your frequency, plus D. Okay, let's get started on going through a few of these. Okay, so it says write an equation of the graphs shown of sine and cosine curve. Each graph uses the intervals from 0 to 360 with the scale of 2 pi. So just like we were graphing 90, 180, 270, and 360. So the first thing that you guys have to decide is it sine or cosine? Well, you're going to ask yourself, where does it start? Does it start at 0 or the amplitude? This one starts at 0, so we know that that is sine. What's my amplitude, my highest right here? So we have 0, 1, 2, okay? So my amplitude is 2. It's positive because we're sine, it's going up right here. So just be careful with that positive and negative. The frequency, how many do you see start at 0, midway 0, at the end is 0. So we see one frequency. And the midline is midway between the max and the min. So that's going to be y is equal to 0. So this midline, all this midline does is tell us that there's no vertical shift up or down. So we can go ahead and now write the equation. Y is equal to 2, because that's my amplitude, sine x. You don't need the frequency of 1x. You'll just see that you'll see 1x plus 0. That plus 0 isn't necessary either, but you guys can put that just so you get into the habit of that. Okay, this next one, is it sine or cosine? This is, for some reason, off a little bit. Okay, you guys want to see where does it start? Okay, it starts at 0, so you guys are going to say that it's sine. What is my amplitude? How high is this? 1, 2, 3. So you guys can see 3. Now this is where you have to be careful with your frequency. Okay, you guys can see that this right here is 360. Okay, are you seeing the whole sine curve? Start at 0, midway, back up. Okay, so you'll see that it hits 0 at 3 points. Okay, you're going to see that you only see half. Okay, the 3 major points right here would be 0, 0, 180, and that's going to be at 3, and then midway 360 back down to 0. You don't see it going back, so your frequency is going to be 1, and your 1/2, because you only see half of that, and your midline is going to be y is equal to 0. Okay, if this cycle continued, midway between -3 and +3 would be 0. So we have y is equal to 3 sine 1/2 x plus 0. Okay, moving on to example number 3. You guys have to decide if it was sine or cosine. So we have to see where it starts at. So you're going to say, oh, it's cosine because it is starting at 0. This is where you have to be extremely careful right here. Because this right here was shifted 2 units up. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to find your midline. Your midline is the max to your min, which is right here. And that is y is equal to 2. So at your midline, sine is starting at that midline right there, and then going up, back up, ending at the midline, ending at that midline. That midline indicates that we did have a shift 2 units up. So we have a midline of 2. And remember, we're only going from 0 to 360. So you can really cross all of that out when you guys are dealing with this, because in the directions it says to go from 0 to 360. So we know that this is sine because this was shifted 2 units up based on our midline. Our amplitude is 1. It's going to go up 1 unit. Okay. The frequency, you guys can go ahead. We're going to start at the midline, hit the midline again, and that's 1. Start at the midline, end at the midline, and you're going to see that that's 2. So we see that we have a frequency of 2. Okay, was it reflected? Yes, it was reflected, because you guys can see that it went down first with sine and then back up. Okay, so our equation is y is equal to -1, because that's our amplitude, sine 2x plus 2. They do get a little challenging as you guys move forward, so just be very careful. I suggest that you figure out that midline first, which will be a little bit helpful. Now, for some reason, my number 4 is cut off, so I'm going to go right to 5. Okay? My amplitude, you guys can, whoops, is it sine or cosine? You guys can go ahead and see that this right here is going to be starting at 0, and that our midline is right here from the max to the min. So you guys can see that it is sine. Our amplitude, 0, 1, 2, 3. We have an amplitude of 3. We're going to assume that this is 0 to 360. So you guys want to see how many frequencies that you guys have. So we start at 0 and end at 0. That's 1. Start at 0, go through 0. That's 2. And the last one. So we have a frequency of 3. Our midline, y is equal to 0. Was it reflected? Yes, because again, that sine curve went in the direction down. So you say, yes, it was reflected, which means that you're going to be adding that negative. So you have y is equal to -3 sine 3x plus 0. All right, let's move on to 6. We have the 6 right here. Is it a sine or cosine? You guys can go ahead and make sure you find that midline first, okay? So your midline is the difference between the highest and your lowest point, okay? It's midway between. So you guys are going to see that the midline right here is y is equal to -2, okay? Which, what you want to say is, does this sine or cosine start at the midline? If it starts at the midline, it's sine. If it doesn't start at the midline, then we're going to say it's cosine because it's starting at the amplitude. So you guys are going to see that it's cosine. You guys are going to see that the amplitude right here is 1. Whoops. A is equal to 1. Remember, amplitude will never be a negative, because even though you guys say, oh, it's at -1, that -1 there is just going to go ahead and tell us the direction there. So the frequency here, you're going to see that it is 1. We have 1 cosine. And our midline is -2. And is it reflected? Well, the sine curve goes like this right here. This is one that is not reflected. If it's reflected or flipped, it looks like this, so no. The reason why it was shifted, because it was shifted down 2 units based on that midline. So no, it wasn't reflected. We have y is equal to 1 cosine x minus 2. Okay, what happens if the x-axis isn't labeled from 0 to 2 pi? So you guys are going to go ahead and do the same thing. You're going to ask yourself if it's sine or cosine. Okay, so you guys go ahead. I'm going to put this like this right here. So this right here starts at 0, so we know that this is sine. Okay, so you're going to be focusing in on x-axis, goes up to, and then you guys need to go always, you want it to be at 2 pi, okay? So notice this x-axis is labeled pi, that means 180, okay? But the directions state that you need to go from 0 to 2 pi. So what you guys need to do is realize that this one, for example, starts at pi and it ends at 2 pi. What did you have to multiply pi by to get to 2 pi? You had to multiply by 2. Okay, so that's going to go ahead and help us with our frequency. The number of curves, you guys can see that this right here is sine. We start at 0, we end at 0, start at 0, end at 0. So we have 2 curves. And if we were to go ahead and do the frequency, we need to multiply by that same number, which is 2. So we're going to get a frequency of 4. So basically, when this is, you need to double this, you need to double that curve also. So just be extremely careful with that. Our amplitude right here is at 1. Was it reflected? It's sine curve, so it is moving upward, so no. So we have y is equal to 1 sine 4x. And again, the reason why this is 4, it's doubled, is because this is only 180. If there's 2 curves from 0 to 180, from 0 to 360, there would be double that amount. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and try one more. And then if you have any questions, please make sure that you contact me so I can go ahead and help you with any of those if you need help. Okay? This one right here, you guys can find that midline from the highest to lowest. The midline is y is equal to 0, so we're okay with that. So is it starting at 0 or the amplitude? We can say it's cosine. The amplitude right here is 3. This is now 4 pi. So you always want to go ahead, and if it's starting at 4 pi and you want to get to 2 pi, we're actually going to be dividing by 2 here. So whatever you get your frequency, you're going to go ahead and divide it by 2. And or you can see that this right here, this slash right here, is actually halfway. So this is 0, this is 2 pi, which is 360. This right here is double that, which is 720 degrees. So this is actually equal to 720. So really what you're focusing in on for this curve right here, and the frequency is from that point to 2 pi. Or you can divide this by this curve. You have one curve, and 1 divided by 2, which is going to give you a frequency of 1/2. Was it reflected? Yes. You guys can see that this cosine curve will usually start at the amplitude and end at that amplitude up there. If it's reflected or flipped, you guys can see it'll start in that other direction and move that way. So you guys can take your equation, y is equal to, don't forget this represents -3 cosine 1/2 x. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please make sure that you ask me. Otherwise, have a great day.